after death communication. You know, your grandma comes to you. People, that happens all the time, but people don't talk about it. The more we talk about all of these subjects and normalize them, the easier it will be to talk about them rationally. And I think that there is a rational way to talk about them, even though they are irrational things. I could feel what they were sending me. And every single one of them, including when my dad visited me after he died, the light that he carried just wasn't his own. It was the source energy pouring through him. Psychic ability seems to be pretty normal among NDEs. We all seem to come back with this capacity. And those of us who go far enough on the other side where the divine communicates with us, there's no brain, we don't have any brains. There's no language. It's all direct data. Ba-boom. But it seemed to be just a natural, normal thing. And all of my neighborhood kids were there. I lived in a neighborhood and all the kids were there. And all of us were immobilized. And I could see these two tall beings, and they were dressed in white, and they were human looking, and they were extra tall, and everything was sort of white and clean. But I think he's telling the truth. How's that? I think he's telling the truth. And I should let your audience know I'm a UFO experiencer.
Our healthcare system. 0.
Welcome everyone to Cosmic Convergence. Today we have a returning guest, Peter Panagore. Last time we explored his incredible near-death experiences and how they transformed his life, leading him away from the church and into deeper understanding of non-local consciousness. In this conversation, we'll dive even further into discussing how these profound insights connect to UFOs and the future of human awareness. If you would like to catch up and watch the previous episode, click on the link up here or the one in the description. For those of you new here, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you can be updated when we drop new interviews. And as always, I'm joined by my fellow co-hosts, Daniel and John. And thank you so much, Peter, for being here and taking the time to speak with us again. It's a pleasure to have you back.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me back, guys.
Absolutely. So just to get things started, I know that between us and you and your content, we're always talking about love, interconnectedness, near-death experiences, how they transform people's lives, and how there is a lot more going on than, the day-to-day that we're typically aware of. And recently, there have been new revelations with new whistleblowers coming out, crash retrieval programs, and the recent Jake Barber coming out talking about a crash retrieval program that he was a part of with him and his colleagues. On the News Nation interview, he brings up a moment when he's going to pick up one of these craft, these NHI, non-human intelligence craft, and how he starts to become overwhelmed with emotion, love, sadness, interconnectedness, feeling that is borderline divine, mother-daughter like feeling. And I couldn't help but compare how that sounds to people who have near-death experiences, and how he also mentions for us to start fully understanding this phenomenon that's happening, we have to kind of bring in, the whole psychic phenomena or spiritual phenomenon to them in I guess, the military or whatever division that they're a part of. The official term is psionics, but showing us that there's more to the human condition, that we're more than just, body and material. But just wanted to bring that up to you just because I feel like with your experiences, you would be able to connect with that.
Yeah, I definitely can connect with that. And that particular part, very psychic. About maybe a month ago, somebody brought up to me the telepathy tapes. If you guys right? So I found a ton of ideas and experiences in there that relate directly to me and my near-death experience. And telepathy this sounds like that's what was going on for this helicopter pilot. He had this telepathic experience of the energy of the entity. The difference was I noticed that I didn't feel any sadness on the other side. There was, when in my telepathic divine experience, there was only joy and bliss and wonder and all those sorts of things. But I'll tell you, on this side, the people talk about empathy in near-death experience, but that isn't how I really experienced it, especially when I came back, and I still experience it. There was this long period of time that I had to withdraw from. I couldn't go to concerts. I couldn't be in crowds. Self-isolated. Almost immediately, I began that process because whenever I was in the company of some other people, especially groups of people, or anyone who was had a heightened emotion, their emotions became mine. I couldn't tell where they ended and where I began. It was very confusing for a very long time. I was like permeable, and not only could I feel their emotions, it wasn't so much that their thoughts would come into me like language, but I would well, the way experience it now is I'll be in a counseling session with somebody, and I'll be listening intently, and I use my pencil and I write notes so that it helps me think and helps me help me pay attention. But suddenly, some thought will come into my head and I'll say something like, maybe you ought to think about getting a cocker spaniel. And the person will say back to me, "Oh my God, that's what, I was just looking at a cocker spaniel last week." And I have no reason to mention a cocker spaniel. So I continue to experience psychic ability. I don't pursue it. It's not my destiny to go after that. But I think he's telling the truth. How's that? I think he's telling the truth. And I should let your audience know I'm a UFO experiencer. I've had 3 encounters so far, and the most recent one was during COVID, and I was in my backyard, and it wasn't egg shaped, okay? But as I watched that video, it was round and it looked like that. There was no visible means of propulsion. It was luminous. It was between the flying. There was an east wind blowing really hard up above, and I was watching these feathery clouds blow by beneath the moon, beneath the stars, and above the trees in my yard. And this object against the wind proceeded without any visible means of propulsion on a steady line till I lost it across the horizon. And it wasn't a satellite, it wasn't up above the clouds, and it wasn't an airplane. It looked like that object that they showed in that sling on that video, but it wasn't an egg-shaped. Well, from my perspective, it looked round, but very similar. And so what I heard from this fella, helicopter pilot, sure sounded like he was telling the truth to me.
And
I agree.
I agree with you too. When you mentioned that there's only joy and bliss, and it led me to believe because he was feeling the sadness, I felt like that was more. This is my opinion. I just think it was a being directly interfacing with him, and kind of like with that telepathic or empathetic connection, he was feeling what it was feeling. Because a lot of experiencers will talk about that. We had a previous guest, Yossi Ronan from Israel, and he was talking about his experience in the 1980s, and he mentioned how at first he was terrified when he encountered these beings physically in his room. And he realized that he could feel what they were feeling because he felt that they penetrated him, his mind. And he started to question himself, like, how can I actually know that they feel the fear if I'm also not connecting with them on the same level they're connecting with me? And that kind of made his fear die down a little bit, that they weren't just reading his mind and like going through him. He was also connecting with them, and he could feel what they were feeling. So there's that similarity, and many experiences talk about this. So that's what led me to believe that. But there's that connection that a lot of near death experiences talk about, that on the other side you can feel that, especially during something like a life review. So I feel like these beings, NHI, whatever they are, have the capability to kind of like turn that on in us. So I found that fascinating, wanted to bring that up.
Which means it's probably there in the first place.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, before my NDE, my mom, I was telepathic with my mom. She's in a nice home, but she's in an apartment in a facility now. She's in her 90s, and I saw her a couple of weeks ago, and having listened to these telepathy tapes, I said to her, "So, Mom, do you remember when I was a kid that we were telepathic and I could hear you calling me? Like I'd be out in the woods, out half a mile from house, and I could hear her in my head." Like, not like language, but I knew that and then later on, I know that when she wanted me to call her, I could, like, "Call me, Peter, call me, Peter." I think that it is a latent I think it's latent in humans, and I think a lot of near-death experiencers in particular, not to the exclusion of other people, but NDErs in particular, we all many of us come back with this permeability. I know that people feel me too, and I know that they do because they tell me they do. I waited until people started telling me before I ever brought it up. I didn't wanna be saying it putting ideas inside their heads. I haven't had an encounter with, an off-world intelligence. I've seen the crafts. I haven't had an interpersonal connection except for when I had this dream maybe 15 years ago, and in this dream, I was lucid in the dream, and I was in in a circle. I was lying on my back in a circle on a floor, a metallic floor, and all of my sister was next to me, and I might have been 10 or 12 years old in the dream, maybe yeah, maybe 10, and all of my neighborhood kids were there. I lived in a neighborhood, and all the kids were there, and all of us were immobilized, and I could see these two tall beings, and they were dressed in white, and they were human looking, and they were extra tall, and everything was sort of white and clean. And as the female started walking around the room with a device over all of our heads, maybe holding it her arm length and saying inside my head, saying, "You won't remember a thing." And as she walked by, I woke up, and I'd never had a dream like that before. I was like, "What the heck was that all about?" It was lucid. I was aware in the dream, that I was sleeping. I was aware in the dream that I was in this space. I knew my sister was next to me. But that so I don't have any I can't corroborate it like someone else can, but I can talk that, psychic ability is seems to be pretty normal among NDErs. We all seem to come back with this capacity. And those of us who go far enough on the other side where the divine communicates with us, there's no brain that we don't have any brains. There's no language. It's all direct data. Ba-boom. And why if I could have done this with my mom, and I wasn't trying to do it, she might have been, but now she's not really able to talk much anymore. But it seemed to be just a natural, normal thing.
Yeah.
So going back to Jake Barber, what I found interesting, and I, as far as I can recall, I haven't had a near death experience. I mean, I've had a couple times where it was close, like the tornado that hit our house several years back, and lost some time on that one. That was a bizarre um, instance. But I'm sorry, I don't mean to digress. So when Jake is Mr. Barber's talking about that connection, okay, and that love and that sorrow that Chris is mentioning, and I'm wondering, as an NDE or yourself, I seem to recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, that after you had your NDE experience, the first one, I would guess, and you came back, you kind of felt that separation from the universal consciousness, from source. And I'm wondering, this is just hypothetical, maybe you can comment on this, that perhaps that's what Barber may have, the root of what he might have been feeling was that throughout his life, he's never known of that connection. And so when that connection was made, yes, he felt the joy, but he also felt the sorrow of why hasn't this been with me my entire life kind of thing. Now I'm interjecting that. That's not what he said. But do you think that there might be some correlation there?
Yeah, yeah, probably. What I heard him say is that it was sort of what Christian said, is that it sounded to me like he was feeling the feelings of the entity that he was encountering. But every single non-human energy, a deceased person, this angelic being that would take me out of my body, I could feel what they were sending me. And every single one of them, including when my dad visited me after he died, the light that he carried just wasn't his own. It was the source energy pouring through him. And so I suppose it'd be possible that when he's experiencing this intelligent being, that was at the root of it anyway. If you dig down deep enough, that's what you're going to find. That's what the circle whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. That's what that's talking about. It's the omnipresence of the divine in everything there is. And if there's eh, at the end of like Paramahansa Yogananda's autobiography, the yogi, he gets visited by his master in a psychic sort of way. And that kind of story is throughout history. There's always Jesus up on the mountain during the transfiguration, Moses appears to him. There's that kind of thing that happens all the time. So, and the light energy seems to be radiant from the light source itself and these kinds of stories. So why not that in this circumstance too? but I did kind of take away that he was kind of feeling the emotions of this being. But also, the although I haven't felt it myself here, I've talked to people who feel the sorrow of the divine sorrow at our human misbehavior.
Yes, yes, I would agree with that. And
Mm,
it's kind of like, and again, not to be repetitive for everybody in the audience, but I had what I called the hug, which was pretty much an entity that I couldn't see, putting its positive energy into me and giving me love that's indescribable. And I kind of felt that as well. That love that was just so overwhelming, but it was also this kind of like melancholy kind of sadness that was being lifted from me through the entity or whatever touched me in that way. And it's profound. So, in watching that interview, and I could see that he's trying to hold back his emotions because he's military and stuff like that, but it's still coming through, was just validation for me because I've felt that before. And what I find really interesting about this, because you're a former like minister, correct? So when is how these military personnel now that have been trained, combat trained and ready are now starting to that have had these experiences are now starting to open up about love, right? And
mhm.
that's really monumental. And I know a lot of people that are covering this, like in the media and such, they really fail to touch on that very much. They don't really go into that. And I think that's probably one of the most important perspectives of this whole thing is, these essentially trained to kill are now having these feelings of love coming into them. And that's got to be a change of perspective for them. And I could just see how profound it is, right? That's a good thing. That's definitely a good thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, especially with what they were saying when it comes to there's a portion, I don't know if you got to this part, Peter, but there's a portion in there where he says that he's not the first person to talk about this kind of thing. There's other people who've talked about this, Stephen Greer and other people as well, where Ricardo Gonzalez, where that when you use intention, meditation, peace, love within yourself to intentionally call these beings, they appear. They seem to show an interest, an invested interest in people showing love, an interest in consciousness, peaceful intentions. And then whenever fear is brought into the, somebody in the group is afraid, they kind of move off like we're not about that. So I do agree with you, Jonathan. I think it's a really big thing to not only show us that there's nothing to really be afraid of, but by showing us that it's also shining a light on something within ourselves we kind of been hiding for a very long time. So and to also touch on what you were saying, Peter, about telepathy tapes, and even this on again, off again when it happens, because it's happened to me as well. I think that we're in a time period now where something in all of us is like turning on, and having certain experiences can accelerate that. NDE, a euphoric experience. You could just be walking down the street. It's happened to some people, no NDE, but then all of a sudden they have this
Yeah.
profound interconnected feeling. That's happened to me also. And people are starting to become more capable of doing things that we never thought possible. And again, kind of like Jacob mentioning, he's like, people are just going to have to get over it, because that's what this all entails. That the remote viewing program, all of these things, that they did it for a reason, because it works. There's something to it. So I think that whether we're being activated, whether it's a part of natural evolution, something is happening.
Yeah. Well, thanks. I thank you again, Peter, for coming on the show and great thoughts so far, everyone. Since we last talked, have you found that in on the UFO topic, in NDE topic, have you feel like there has been a slow acceptance of the topic since we talked over a year ago, or do you feel like it's been more of the same? Have you had personal interactions with people that have been having encounters, or are there things that's been either the same or a ramp up of kind of events?
Oh, I think it's ramping up. I think people in a similar way that NDE is near death experience is being talked about in the public square. I think it's become safer to talk about UFOs, UAPs in the public square, and I think that's a big part of it. I kept my experiences a secret because I didn't want to be tinfoil hat guy.
Mhm.
But there was I couldn't ever deny that it actually happened. There were three other guys in the car with me the first time it happened. It was real. But I think that the more we talk about these things that are, well, like the telepathy tapes, we're talking about telepathy for crying out loud. And after death communication, your grandma comes to you. People, that happens all the time, but people don't talk about it. The more we talk about all of these subjects and normalize them, the easier it will be to talk about them rationally. And I think that there is a rational way to talk about them, even though they are irrational things. I think that, and
Yeah.
I think that those two things aren't exclusive. In your experience, Christian, most people until the 20th century, when cardiac care started bringing people back from the dead left and right, 10 to 20 million in the U.S., and that's the same across the world on a percentage basis, as far as we can tell. Previously, it was mostly just, walking down the street and getting struck by a bolt of beauty or joy or something and have a transcendent experience, or you get a hug, Jonathan. That kind of stuff, it's all through the ancient literature in the East and the West. It's woven in. You can see it in the freaking Bible. It's in there as well. But I think that the UFO thing in particular, I've been, of course, like you guys, I watched those congressional hearings. I'm sure you guys watched them.
Mhm.
I definitely did, and I think that the more that that kind of thing happens, the easier it is for people to talk about it in their daily life. Now all my family knows. Up until recently, I didn't tell my family. I didn't, I was sitting. I don't know. Did I tell you my brother and I what happened to us? So before my mom went into this facility, she and my dad were living on Cape Cod, and we were in the process. My dad had passed away. We were in the process of getting my mom, selling the house, getting her into a situation, and my brother has a convertible, a Mustang convertible, and he had the top down, and we're driving past the Hyannis Airport, which is this little tiny airport right next to Route 6. It's the only road, it's the only highway on the Cape. And I'm talking to my brother, and I look up over my head, and a Delta craft flew like 3 times the height of the trees right over the top. And it was going super slow, and it had these huge lights underneath it, not like airplane lights, like monstrous lights. And it was black, but the lights were white, and it was going like inching along at a speed that it is not possible to go. And it goes right over us. And I said, David, 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 I just saw a UFO. I just saw a UFO. He didn't even acknowledge it. Didn't even hear me. And but later down the road, uh, maybe 6 months later, I started talking to him about it. It's like, this thing happened, and I told him my stories, and so I know that he believes me. He believes me, and I think it's going to be easier for lots of other people to believe people. And I'm going to liken it this way. Here's this guy who's this highly decorated veteran, obviously worthy of his security clearances, who's coming out of the closet now about this, risking his reputation. It's because of his credentials, and they go into this a lot during this video thing from the News Nation. They go into his credentials in depth. They interview people he knew in order to establish his credibility. I think that lots of us in the NDE community, and probably true in the UFO community, we feel confident enough in our credibility now to be willing to come out and talk about it, which is why I'm talking to you guys about it. I feel the same thing was true for my NDE. I waited till I was ready to tell my stories, but I waited till I had enough credibility, enough professional, like, oh, he did this and he did that. He's all right. He must be a smart guy. He can't be all bad. And so I think that that's a big reason. I think that people feel A, the government's talking about it. B, lots of other people are talking about it. And the more people come out of the closet, the easier it will become to be able to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you're definitely not alone with the dream thing. I've talked about a couple of my experiences, and briefly, I had a dream with a woman who came out, and like I woke up within the dream, and I was like, "Whoa, this is weird." But it was the first time that it was just darkness, and a woman's face came out of the darkness, and I felt like she was doing it, not me. And I asked her, I was like, "How are you doing this?" And she said, "We have the ability to communicate in dreams. Sometimes it's easier to do it that way." And she had
Mhm.
big, like almond-shaped eyes, hybrid looking, human but not. But there are many people having these types of experiences, and I think that whatever these beings are doing is intentional. It seems that it coincides with people sharing their experiences with NDEs, the rise in consciousness, the understanding of consciousness, that we're not just a physical body. And it's like the beings are like aware of this, and they're like, we're also like guiding you through this and giving you hints of all this until such a point that you're ready for something more. That's what it feels like. So you're definitely not alone. We talked about some of these experiences. Each one of us here has had an experience like that.
Well, I would like to piggyback off of that as well, Christian. I've had 3 coworkers now that have explained experiences. One of my coworkers, right, literally the office, right, we have little cubicles at the credit union I work at. He saw lights. He actually got a video. Him and his girlfriend. He had a snow globe effect happen, and then they saw like these lights, about 6 of them, and then the 2 lights and flew off. And yeah, I've had other coworkers have experiences as well. One recently, she shared an experience of seeing an owl outside her house the night right after the evening we were talking about the phenomenon. So people are having these encounters, and I know we've had a lot more people we know as well that have been having personal contact or encounters as well, and not just in dream form, but but physically being either taken out of their house or other things. So they seem to understand that when people are like us that are experiencers are sharing these stories or sharing in in not in a way to just capitalize on it or anything like that, but we genuinely are. I want to get my stories out so this can other people know how reality is, and that maybe they can have their own experience, and they are, and it seems to spread in that way, and they understand this. And I wanted to kind of ask you, Peter, do you think that this is going to build to affecting our kind of mass consciousness of just how we perceive what is real, or do you think that we kind of have this fight that we're going to fight this and resist it for a while until we're able to slowly change?
I think that individuals are going to do exactly what you said in A, and others will be in B. But I think that one of the things that's going on right now is that, well, for the first time in the history of the world, there are hundreds of millions of near-death experiencers, and we all come back as little diodes of light, like fiber optic cable, and we get our little tiny light, and that illuminates the area that we're in. And it sounds. I don't want to be Pollyanna there, because we're still human beings and we still make mistakes, and it doesn't solve our mental illnesses and all the rest of that stuff too. It's just that the light shows itself. And so there's a whole heck of a lot of more light on the world than I think ever in the past on a percentage basis. And so that's happening. And the more that happens, I think that these are intertwined, because of this telepathic thing that's going on with these other world intelligences. It took me a while. I'll tell you, it took me a while to kind of wrap my head around that. And it was one thing for me to hear my mom call me in my head, but it's another thing to be telepathic with these entities. But as I thought about that dream in light of this, and over the last year since I last met with you guys, I've been thinking a lot about this. I was like, well, why is that any different? Why is that any different? And so, in terms of the future history of the world, this is the first time in the history of the world that we have this opportunity. We've always had mystics, Jesus, Muhammad, Lao Tzu, Rumi. You can list a whole bunch of them, and but there's never been so many of us on a percentage basis, and I think that's having an effect. And I've been waiting. It sure seems like there's a lot more UFO sightings these days, right? I'm kind of waiting for them to show themselves, because I think that's going to crumble the religious traditions that are dependent upon the creation stories and the anthropocentrism of humanity, our very self-centeredness. That will all shatter when we find out that when we have evidentiary proof that we're not alone in the universe. But in the meanwhile, it sure feels like a setup to me. Like there's this NDE thing going on. There's people now talking about their mystical experiences, and the reason why I came out in the first place was partly to talk about NDE, but I also have other mystical experiences that I've kept under my hat because it's just not socially acceptable. But now it's becoming, and UFOs are part of that, especially with the psychic part of it. And I know that there are different lots of planets. If you just look at any sci-fi, Star Trek or anything else, you know that there aren't not every race is peaceful, but there's enough. I think that there's going to be more and more peaceful people on earth, peaceful heart, love thy neighbor as thyself.
Mm.
And the more that that becomes true, I think it'll become an inevitability, Daniel. I don't think it's going to stop. I think it's going to get more and more.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're getting into, of course, the past several months, we've had the drones over New Jersey, New
Right.
York, well, Britain, Germany,
Even
all
Japan
across
now,
the world. Yeah,
back on
all
back with
across
it.
the world. All across the world. And, of course, the narrative is that, well, the FAA is, said
Yeah.
that, but, a lot of people aren't buying that. I know I'm not, but a lot of people aren't buying that because I'm not saying that every object isn't a helicopter or a
Right.
plane
Right.
or a drone, right? But regardless, it's opening up a lot of people's eyes now, finally, to the phenomenon or the phenomena. And you can't put that back. They're there now. And a lot more people are becoming aware. And every day these drones keep showing up. It's not stopping. The press, president, whoever decides, we don't DOD, we're past that. It's not happening anymore. But it is. And so that they can't combat that no matter how hard they try. And so this is a really good thing. We got a lot of stuff going on right now that has been going on for some time. These are positive things. But yeah, I don't know really where I was going there. I just kind of wanted to bring that up, maybe get your thoughts about the drone flaps that have been going on. I mean, even had some footage that's just like amazing, not the location where it was at because it was the California fires, but objects that definitely aren't birds or planes or anything like that going through the smoke. Just I mean, we're in some crazy wild times, and I do kind of agree with you that I think that I have this feeling that we're getting kind of set up. That doesn't mean like tomorrow, and set up isn't like
Mhm.
a bad thing, like the mafia is trying to set you up,
Right. Right.
but something's coming down the pike, I guess I could say. And so I definitely agree with you about that. What do you think about the majority of the things going on with the drone narrative and where we're going with that right now?
Well, about a month ago, they came out and they said FAA has no idea what they are, and then this week they say that they know what they are. I'm like, yeah, okay, so this doesn't add up to me. I
For
don't have
research
any.
and reasons is
Yeah, it's research reasons, right? It's like then because they're seeing them in up here. I live in Maine. They're seeing them in Maine too. I mean,
Mhm.
uh, I don't know. I'm hoping, and this is just a hope. It isn't an opinion. It's just a hope that I hope that they're otherworldly crafts, and I hope that they're preparing us for the big reveal because I'm waiting for that. I think that that's going to unite us as a planet in a way nothing else can. Yeah, fingers crossed. Exactly. And people are like, "Well, they're dangerous. You got to watch out for them." Well, if they really were out to get us, they would have gotten us. So
they have the capability. Yeah.
yeah, so I'm not nervous about any of that stuff. Uh, I I'm waiting. I'm waiting and waiting and waiting, and I hope that the sooner the better. If they're listening, the sooner the better.
Right.
Yeah.
Up to that point, all we can do is try to support the ones that are now starting to witness these craft and having these experiences, and just telling them they're not alone, and we're there with them. And that's all no whole reason why we started this podcast and why we have you here today, is just to say, hey, people, you're not alone, you're not crazy. I mean, this stuff
Right.
is, again, worldwide. They say, well, it's just mass hysteria. Well, then, yeah, you want to talk about mass hysteria, it's all over the world. I don't really think that it's just hysteria, right? There's just no way. And it's just always going by the old Project Blue Book kind of gameplay, to where it's like, oh, there's nothing to see here. It's just swamp gas
Right.
or
Right.
skydivers with flares, and it's just they're finding out slowly and surely, they're finding out that those excuses just don't work anymore. We're not in the 1950s, and we're trying to progress here. But there's definitely another side that does not want that progression. And I have my, might sound a little conspiratorial here, but I have my doubts on whether it's just humans that are saying no. I think that there's like some opposing forces out there that I don't even have a clue what it is. That's just something I have in my gut. But yeah, I mean, 2025's been a wild ride, and it's going to keep getting more so. And I know that a lot of the message that you also have is love. And I'll tell you what, right now, the way things are going, not a lot of people are focusing on love. It's very, very divisive as far as at least American culture is right now. And it kind of scares me a little bit. So I mean, how can people start really like focusing on loving thy neighbor with so much vitriol out there? I mean, that's a age long question, but some insight would be great.
Well, I could tell you how I deal with it in my town. My
Yeah.
town, I live in a rural town, and we're divided politically, but there's this. Well, I live in a peninsula, and there's historically there's this thing called peninsulation, and you probably never heard of it. But peninsulation is a reference to an isolated community. So for centuries, w- we were an isolated community, and there were people didn't we didn't have any roads here for 100 years. Everybody got around by boat, uh, so everybody had to rely on everybody else. And if your house burnt down, your enemy would show up and help you rebuild it because next time it could be his barn and he needs your help. And so there's an ethos here in my town, and I know that it's rare, but there's an ethos here. And so let me put it this way: I got invited to my first open carry funeral. Everybody was armed, openly armed at this funeral, and I was one of the only people not in this section of my community. I know people. I knew this guy who died. I liked him. We talked whenever we bumped into each other. Our kids were friends. I was accepted. I was accepted because I accept them as they are. And the other day, I had my electrician came in. We're not on the same page politically, but we are on the same page spiritually. And you can be on the same page spiritually with someone who's not on your page politically. Those are not mutually exclusive because of love. And it's because love thy neighbor as thyself and love God above all things. It supersedes politics. It supersedes everything. And so where I live in our little town here, there's a years ago this church had our community luncheon, and then COVID killed it and it couldn't come back. So this restaurateur decided to resurrect this thing. It's a free lunch. It's a free lunch for everyone in the community. So every Monday at 11 o'clock, 11:30, businesses come in and they serve lunch, and they create an institution where everybody of every type of person can meet and converse with their neighbors in a wonderful setting. And so here we are, this divisive nation, with people at each other's throats, hating each other, hating each other. And to me, that just makes no sense when when we need each other. And that's why it works here, is because we need each other. So I have decided to a long time ago in 1980, but decide isn't really the right word. I came back with this necessity for the pursuit of the light inside of me and the seeing of the light inside of others. And when you look someone in the eyes and you have a light inside yourself, you can't help but see the light inside the other person, no matter who they are, even if they're your enemy. So Jesus was talking about love thy enemy. So I was this minister in the town I still live in, and there was a huge embezzlement in the church that I served. It was there when I got there, and there was one that had preceded it. That embezzlement had ended, and a new one had begun before I got there. So it's just this history of this embezzlement thing. And so, as we got closer and closer to the truth, I had enemies in the church. The CIA, a former CIA operative, an international commodities broker, a vice president of a major national corporation, and an attorney who's currently in prison for embezzlement. And they set out to destroy me as I got closer and closer. I had a group of people I was working that got closer and closer to the truth. I could never hate them. I couldn't hate them because every time I looked at them, I could still see the light inside of them. It was still visible. And so even though I was in opposition to them, I still treated them with courtesy and civility. I tried to keep them off balance. I never screamed at them or yelled at them or blamed them or name called them or any of that kind of stuff. I definitely tried to win, and we did eventually. I could never hate them because they're just like me. When you can see the light inside yourself, you see the origin of love of your own, the ground of your being. You can't help but see it in everybody else. And the
Mhm.
thing that's in the way is our selfishness, our self-attachment to our own ego needs. And you can see that fade away. You can see that fade away in tragedies, when suddenly everybody's humanity comes right to the forefront. And I think it's going to get worse than it before it gets better in our world, but I think it's going to get much, much better.
Our previous guest, Yossi Ronan, had mentioned that he thinks all of this stuff coming up right now, and I agree with him, like war and all this stuff, this negativity that we see on the news that they pump throughout the news all the time. He says that he believes that it's necessary, like that it's not that we like it, but it, like you said, it pushes us to face our darkness because it's like where we're going. You can't sweep the darkness under the rug. You have to face it and you have to deal with it. And through this opposing force, while also simultaneously we have this incoming messages of love, interconnectedness
Mm.
from beings and people in NDEs, it's like a little lesson. So I feel like you're right. We are being set up for something. I also find it fascinating. Another guest that we had, Miriam Delicado, she said that if these beings are negative, if this is all being made up, why is it that like a large bulk of the people who have these encounters with these beings all of a sudden shift towards an awareness and an intention of showing taking better care of the planet, becoming humanitarian, if you will. They after the experience. I'm not saying that there aren't again negative beings out there, because we also talk to guests that talk about some of the negative beings. I've had negative experiences as
Mhm.
well, but
Mm.
the love outshines that. I've had the love more than any of the fear stuff come in. So I don't really pay attention to the fear because I feel like paying attention gives it power. So I think that even though we see all this negativity, it serves a purpose, and we're eternal beings anyway. So this is an important lesson for us to get, and whenever we leave here, we're gonna take those lessons with us, that experience with us, and for ourselves to help others and wherever else we go after here. More of a statement than a question, but just sharing.
Would you agree, Peter, that the people just don't take enough time for self-reflection? They just don't
Uh,
take enough time for self-reflection. Like, this is my life that I've lived so far. This is what I've done. Not saying living in regret or anything like that. Just being able to look back on choices that they've made in the past. That people are just too focused on what's happening now or what they want to have happen tomorrow or the next week or whatever have you. But just take some time to meditate and have some self reflection on one's actions. Sit by and that person that you dislike or that dislikes you and try to see the world through their eyes. And it's kind of a strange, I've done that a couple times where it's just kind of this strange feeling washes over me. Like, how is that person actually seeing me internally and externally, physical and non physical, through their soul? And I'm sure they've done things that they would change and stuff like that. So I think that we just need to really take some time for self-reflection. And it's just kind of one of those things, when we're talking about the life review. Okay, I know that like at NDEs certain people have like a life review. Okay, well, just last week I was in a dream state. I was dreaming and had a life review.
hmm.
And so I'm wondering, and I've heard other people just on social media kind of stating that they're having the same thing, to where, as far as I know, they weren't dying while they were asleep. Although someone did say, I can't remember who, so I'm not going to quote who, said that sleep is a little slice of death, right? And right, so I wonder if this unlocking. I'm not saying I'm unlocked. I have no idea, but that might be happening on more of a on a larger scale to people, to where they're actually having a life review in their dream state, because it's so close, right? We imagine it's so close, that unalive state and that dream state. Have you heard about anybody else having some more like life reviews that may not have actually gone through an NDE?
Well, I did. So
Please.
the day after my NDE, when I had a life review when I was dead, I I'll spare you the whole story, but we hit a semi on the way on driving back to Montana the day after, and it was my fault. And we missed the front end. We missed the front end of the semi by 3 inches, and spun off to the side and ended up smashing head on into the rear wheels. But in the interim, as this whole thing was going on, as we're bouncing back and forth across the road as this semi's coming toward us, I had a life review. It was like I was watching this cassette deck fly by me, tape fly by me, and the pencils in the air, and the guy is screaming, and everything's in slow mo. But then I saw a movie of my life. It was a literal movie. It was like watching a screen. I watched the movie of my life from birth to this moment go right by me, just like a movie. So I know that that happens. I know that you can have a life review and not be dead. Why it's happening to a lot of people now, your guess is as good as mine. Maybe the veil is becoming thinner. Maybe there's a little more psychic ability. I don't think trying to figure out why things are is as important as the experience themselves. So a lot of
Agreed.
people ask why questions about spirituality. I rarely ask those questions because all I can do is speculate. Ask me what? Ask me how? Those are different questions that they're happening at a more frequent level. Jonathan, I'm going to have to take your word for it because you're the first one who's told me that, and I'm glad to hear it.
Definitely. And I think that'll help us in the long run. Hopefully, we continue to have these. Now, whether NHI or other entities, spirits, angels, whatever anybody wants to call them, is assisting in that or not, I just find that fascinating. And then, of course, when something catastrophic happens, like your accident, isn't it interesting about time?
Oh yeah.
It's just kind of because everything seems to slow down. There goes the pen, and like you're saying, and it's just like, and then your life flashes before you, and it's just kind of a whole like, yeah, there really is no time. It is an illusion because you're experiencing this stuff, which should be like instantaneous, and to the rest of the outside observing world, it is, but to you, it's not. And that's kind of what we had when we had that tornado hit our house too. Is it
Uh-huh.
time just slowed, and what felt like forever was just a matter of minutes, and my cell phone was in the bedroom and Melissa's cell phone was with us in the bathroom where we were with our two dogs. But when we came out of the bathroom, her phone was 7 minutes ahead.
Oh,
My phone was at the same time that it would have normally been.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it's just really strange, right? So you go,
huh.
okay, what happened with time there? It's like a missing time kind of a thing with the vortex of the tornado. Heck if I know. Again, like you said, we can only speculate, but it's just interesting. I just find that just fascinating with time to where people always say that when something catastrophic happens, like a car accident, usually things go really slow.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, it's just, I'm sure the people in our viewing audience have it similar. It's just fascinating. It just is.
I was just going
No.
to go right to Daniel, but I was going to comment that's like Barry Allen and the Flash. Whenever he's moving around the room, everybody's standing still, and he's got all this time. Sorry, go ahead, Daniel.
He's
Remember $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman, yeah, and they're supposed to be going like 300 miles an hour or something.
No, I just wanted to talk about the Peter. You mentioned the importance of having community and the importance of having kind of people that are maybe have different political views but are reliant on each other. I think highlight how important that is for all of us. And I know that everyone right now is feeling unbalanced and scared and just on either side of the spectrum. They don't know what is going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen, right? Before we did this interview, I was talking to my partner about just like what local communities can we get involved in? What are minority groups that we can help? Like what are all these things that we can do and investing our time that is maybe spent on certain platforms worrying about things and actually putting it to the where the rubber actually meets the road. So I just wanted to say like it's so important. that we're able to do that and being a support with one another and supporting our local communities, because that's going to be what helps us get through whatever challenges we have. It's really challenging, especially the fact that we have so much social media and so much doom and gloom news because it gets views. It really taking that time to take a step back, sit, with ourselves, and also how are things affecting our friends, family, community, that maybe see things differently. And that's a really hard ask. Sometimes when we get really charged, when we have these experiences as experiencers, it does really kind of make us take that look, like that real look, that eagle view of like, oh, all my problems, all my stuff internally that I'm always worrying about, it's not such a big issue on like on the grand scheme of things. And it really helps us broaden our awareness. So, like after an event I had almost a year ago, I had a channeling experience where I started looking at where I was stepping, to make sure I wasn't stepping on a bug, like things like that, where you're hypersensitive to how you're affecting things, because you're like, oh, it's not just me, it's not just my problems, I'm interconnected with everything, and I want to be protector and caretaker for what I have in my awareness and responsibility as human. And I hope that continues to grow. I wanted to just ask you, Peter, as we go into this uncertain times and uncertain, like where we're kind of like having this storm coming, right, where everything's becoming more unstable, where should our focus be to help? It's not that no one's going to not ride that storm out, it's how do we weather that well, and how do we protect as many people through that weathering of the storm?
Well, I think you touched on it with community. Like, it's not possible to do it alone. But in terms of the strength and the courage to persevere, that for me comes from this interconnectedness, the cultivation of this interconnectedness. And for me, it comes through a practice of meditation, non attachment, breath, and mantra based meditation, where I quiet my mind and allow, let me put it this way, the more I step aside from my own attachment to myself, the more space love has to grow inside me, and then it doesn't retract. It expands and it stays expanded. So there's this interior journey, but then there's this exterior journey of service to others. And I know that that's not a popular thing. Service to others it's often viewed as weak. It's not capitalistic. And I recognize that capitalism has raised the standard of living globally in a way that the Middle Ages and feudalism didn't. So I just wanted to say but this is not a capitalist idea. The serving of others is giving it away. You stop for a second. You go into the grocery store. You see someone who you know is on the other side, and you stop and you open the door for them, and you hold the door for them, and you don't mumble in your heart when you're doing it. You hold the door for them because that's the right thing to do. It's all that sort of civil, sort of slick, a little silicone spray on the civility to let it slide easily. But in terms of larger scale things, it's really how we treat each other, how we care for each other. Food for the people who are hungry, firewood if you're in my area, firewood for people who can't afford gas but they got a stove, that kind of thing. It goes a long way for binding people together. And one of the things that happened, I think, in the United States during the Industrial Revolution is a lot of those bindings broke because we were no longer a farming community where you knew everybody. Knowing your neighbor, just knowing your neighbor is a major thing. The old borrowing a cup of sugar thing, lending a
Mhm.
cup of sugar is the other side of that. It's a big deal.
we
Community.
have like we have like two options really. Let's say the hypothetical option, and I'm sure it happens more than we realize. You go to the grocery store and there's somebody in front of you, and yeah, they have a lot of items, but they find out that they're short. And so they have to decide, okay, should I get the milk or should I, get the bread? Just again, hypothetically. Now we're standing behind, we're next in line. Do we look at them with disdain like, oh, maybe you should learn to budget your money better, or now how
Right.
much you have before you get to the register. Now it's going to be taking me longer to get my items checked out. Or do you go, you know what? I'll help. I'll help. I'll buy your milk. Pay it forward is what they used to say. Pay it forward. I'll go ahead and buy your milk. And it's showing that compassion. And so now we're kind of like, it's like you said, I mean, we're living in pretty good standards compared to some other parts of the world as far as poor. Like
Hmm.
we're poor in other countries, they don't have a TV, they don't have a cell phone. We just need to start having that compassion and then putting ourselves in somebody else's shoes to say, hey, look, I have been in the past, like myself personally, I have been in that situation where I cannot afford that
Yeah.
milk. Okay.
Right.
And then
Me
I've been
too.
in the position to, yeah. And I've been in the position to where I can, and I can also help somebody else get theirs. So it's again, community, right? So I decide that I'm going to go and help feed homeless at a soup kitchen, okay, or something like that. Instead of looking down at them and saying, well, get a job, you bum. What I'm doing is I'm trying to make sure that they have something to eat on that cold winter night. It's that compassion. It's that Christ-like love, right?
Hmm.
To where you are taking care of those that are less fortunate than yourselves. And we're at a point in time right now to where it's like the people that are more unfortunate than ourselves as far as society are looked as being a burden, when really I think the burden are the ones that do not help and assist, and the ones that do not show that love and compassion. And I mean, we just need to do better. And that service to others is also a service to self. Would you not agree? Because it helps
100%.
you know, us reach a higher level, and not in a like I'm better than you kind of way, but it just opens up our chakras, our love, our compassion, and it would just make for a better world.
There was a woman who had an NDE, Penny. I forgot her last name. You might know who I'm talking about, Peter, but
I do. I do.
yeah, and she talked about how that exact scenario you brought up, John, came up, and she gave the money she had to someone, and she got to see in her life review how that affected that person, and that like a stone in the water in the pond, how it rippled out, and how that woman came across another scenario, and she remembered to pay it forward because of what happened to her, and Penny helping her out, so she helped the other person out, and it's just like this domino effect of love and compassion that starts happening. So I think, yeah, it's important.
I hate to keep picking on Jesus, but or Yeshua, I should call him because that's his Aramaic name. When did I see you, Lord? When you gave it to the least of these, you gave it unto me. This is because it's universally true that we are all one. And so when you give to the other, you're giving to yourself, as Jonathan was saying. But it reduces arrogance and brings in humility. And humility is the hallmark sign of mystical geniuses, Rumi, Hafez, Jesus, and all of them. They've all got this John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila. Humility is a real thing, and it comes through seeing the other as oneself, just as you guys are saying.
I hope you don't mind me bringing this up. I had one last thing personally to bring up, if you're able to talk about it. I know that you are working on a movie, and I just wanted to see how that was coming along because I don't know about you guys, but I want to be first in line to see that. So,
Um,
I want to
Thanks.
be an
It's
extra, you know?
my brother-in-law was an extra in Jaws. He
oh,
was one of
cool.
the guys on the beach when he was a kid.
That's
Anyway, it
cool.
could happen. It could happen, Jonathan.
We need a bigger
Um,
boat.
You need a bigger mouth. That's right. Yeah, the movie's going great. I was in LA just before Pacific Palisades burned. I was in Pacific Palisades. My producer's house did not burn, but it's a disaster
Oh,
area
wow.
there. It's unbelievable. But the movie itself is going along very well. We're now fast tracking, and we're making great progress. We still got a little ways to go, but it's all going great. I'm super excited for the whole process where we are right now as we begin this next big stage.
That's awesome. Definitely will bring it up in a future episode. That'll be maybe throw
It'll
the trailer up or something.
it'll
But
Definitely
come.
have to give us release dates, and anything like pressers or anything, we'll push it out. We'll push it out for you as
Thanks,
many
man.
as we can, because one is all. So,
One as well.
we get one person interested to watch it, and they'll pass that knowledge and wisdom and love forward. So, absolutely.
Did you have any final statements, Peter, or anything you wanted to get out?
Well, trust your heart when you feel love. Be willing to help someone who you might perceive is on the other side, whatever that side is. Approach with humility and don't give them anything to push against. Don't bring up if they're an angry person, don't give them anger back because you just feed the situation. Bring love, but also protect yourself and be safe. Always be safe. But love the one you're with and love those who you wouldn't love if you didn't think about it.
Absolutely. And I oftentimes when you're in a state of needing help yourself, it's a surprise that a lot of times helping another can be the solution to the situation that you're in, and you never would have expected it if you didn't lend out a hand.
A lot like grief, Christian, in that people who lose loved ones who learn to love again. And I don't mean like finding a new spouse. I mean just like loving the people around you rather than wallowing in the pain. And I don't mean wallow because people go through the grieving process. It's real. But if you want to overcome your grieving process, love is the key, and it's the same key just as you described. So there you have it.
Absolutely. And where can people find you, Peter, if they want to reach out to you?
PeterPanagore.love. And I have a specialty in my counseling. I counsel people who've had traumatic or major or minor mystical experiences and they need help integrating.
Everyone watching, we hope you enjoyed the episode. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Go check out Peter's website. Go check out his YouTube channel. He's also on TikTok for as long as TikTok remains alive.
Well, thanks again, Peter. It's been a pleasure. Like I said, you're like my capybara, and you always like I've been through a lot internally as far.
Take care, everybody.
Our healthcare system. 0.